Well, here's this parable again. The one we don't much like. It's a hard parable to work with, and we would like to believe that it is simply a lesson in the virtue of humility. But it's not. It's actually a lesson in the pointlessness of religion, in the senselessness of the idea that there is anything you can do to put yourself right with God. This parable is about the idiocy of even trying to put yourself right with God. This parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector is told by Jesus after having given a series of illustrations of the meaning of faith. And it comes just before Jesus announces for the third time that he will die and rise again. Therefore, it really could not be taken as advice to assume a meek and modest religious stance rather than a self-righteous one. To the contrary, it is an admonition to abandon all religious stances, all moral and ethical ones too, when you try to seize your justification before God. This parable is an insistence that you move on to the heart of the gospel, which is faith in God who raises the dead. So let's look at the characters in this parable. Let's start out by forgetting everything you've ever heard about Pharisees and their holier-than-thou attitude. Let's give this particular Pharisee all the credit we can. Let's see him as a good man, not a crook or a time server or a womanizer. He works hard, takes only what he has earned honestly, gives fair and full measure, is faithful to his wife, and patient with his children, dedicated to his friends. The Pharisee is nothing like this tax collector, though. This tax collector, who is the worst kind of villain, a legal one, a mafia-style enforcer working for the Roman government, working for the enemy against his own people. This tax collector lives high on the extra money he bilks from the Jews. He flashes his money and power everywhere he goes. But let's look back at the Pharisee again. This Pharisee is good, but not only good, but religious also. And he's not a hypocrite to his religiosity either. His outward respectability is matched by his inward discipline. He follows all the religious rules. He fasts 2 times a week. He gives the first 10% of everything to God. And best of all, the icing on the cake, this Pharisee thanks God for his happy state. Now Luke tells us that Jesus told this parable to those who trusted in themselves that they were very righteous. But then Jesus says that the Pharisee in the story gave God the glory for his circumstance. Maybe this Pharisee went to the temple to pray because somewhere along the line that week he had slipped up a bit and thought of his righteousness as his own doing. Maybe he said to himself, "That's terrible. I must make a special visit to this temple and set my values straight by thanking God." But what conclusion does Jesus come to about this good man? Jesus tells us that not only is he in bad shape, but that he's in worse shape than the tax collector. That tax collector who is the scum of the earth. That tax collector who just waltzes into the temple and does nothing more than admit that he's lost and dead. Sounds like an unacceptable parable to me. Because you would, and I know I would, gladly accept and welcome that particular Pharisee into our midst. But we'd have a much harder time accepting and welcoming the tax collector. Be honest, wouldn't we all have a terribly hard time thinking it was enough for that scoundrel to just come in here and say, "God be merciful to me, a sinner"? You know, there just doesn't seem to be any way of dramatizing this parable from our point of view. So that being the case, let's look at it from God's point of view. God is there, sitting in the temple, doing his God business. And in come these 2 guys. The Pharisee walks right over to God, sits down and pulls out a deck of cards, and he shuffles a few times, and then he says to God, "You cut. I'm on a winning streak." God will have none of it, though. He smiles sadly and pushes the cards away and says, "Maybe you're not. Maybe your luck just ran out." So the Pharisee picks up the cards and begins the game himself anyway. He says, "Is Texas Hold'em okay with you?" And he deals God a 2 of fasting and a king of no adultery. And God says, "Stop, stop, stop. I told you, maybe this isn't your game. I don't want to take your money." "Oh, come on," says the Pharisee. "How about 7-card stud then? 10's wild? I've been real lucky lately with 10's wild." But God looks a little exasperated and says, "I really mean it. Don't play me. The odds are always on my side. Besides, you don't even have a full deck. You'd be better off being like that other guy who came in with you. He lost his cards before he even got here. Doesn't even play that game anymore." Do you see yet what Jesus is saying about this parable? He's saying that as far as the Pharisee's ability to win a game of justification with God is concerned, he's no better off than the tax collector. In fact, the Pharisee is worse off, because while they are both indeed losers, the tax collector at least has the sense to acknowledge that he is a loser and take God up on his offer of grace. The point of this parable is that they are both dead, and their only hope is someone who can raise the dead. But I can hear you saying in the back of your mind, yes, but isn't there a distinction to be made after all? Isn't the Pharisee somehow still better than the tax collector? Can't we give him credit for the real goodness that he does have? But that is the common miscalculation. Death is death. Take the tax collector. He has lived long enough in this particular life to know without a doubt that as far as his being able to deal with God is concerned, he's all washed up. On the other hand, the Pharisee, seeing his lifetime of good deeds, has figured that they are more than enough to keep him in the game for the rest of his life. But right there is his error. For the rest of his life here, maybe he can stay in the game. But what about in eternity? Maybe here the Pharisee has what it takes to keep it all in check. He doesn't hate, murder, envy, cheat. But what if he doesn't hate or murder or envy or cheat simply because there has been no opportunity? How would he know? How would he know he was immune to those things? Have you never thought yourself immune to some vice only to find that you fell into it when the temptation became sufficient? The lady who resists a $5 proposition might give in to a $5 million one. Men who would never betray friends have been known to betray friends that they thought were about to betray them. Or the reformer immune to the corruption of fat power finds corruption easier and easier as he gains power. So the Pharisee's resolve is sufficient for this life, but can he possibly maintain that resolve for eternity? In God's presence, forever, is his armor of humility so utterly without a chink? And there, you see, is the problem as God sees it. Even one bit of grit in the perpetual motion machine called eternity can bring the whole thing to a grinding halt. What Jesus is saying in this parable is that no human goodness is good enough to pass a test like that, and that therefore God is not about to risk it. He loves you too much. God will not take the life we hold so dear into eternity. He will only take the clean emptiness of our death in the power of Jesus' resurrection. The Pharisee is condemned because he stakes his claim on a life that God cannot use. And the tax collector is commended because he rests his case on a death that God can use. The honest truth is that while you understand the intent of the parable with your mind, your heart has a desperate need to believe it's the exact opposite. And frankly, so does mine. We all yearn to confirm our identity by seeing ourselves as approved in others' eyes. We want badly to deny the reality of our condition, that we are unable to justify ourselves before God. But we cling desperately to the whole business of justifying ourselves to God, and we fear the tax collector's acceptance because we know precisely what it means. It means that we will never be free until we are dead to the whole self-justification business. And that means we will never be free until we are dead. But the good news is that Jesus came to raise the dead. As long as you're struggling like the Pharisee to be alive in your own eyes, and to the precise degree that your struggles are for what is holy and just and good, you are going to resent the apparent indifference to your pains that God shows in making the effortlessness of death the touchstone of your justification. Only when you finally admit that you are dead will you be able to stop balking at grace. Now, I will admit that that is one terrifying step. You will resist and cry and deny before you take it, because it means leaving behind the toxic familiar for the unknown. But I can tell you 3 things that are true. First, it is only one step. Second, it is not a step out of reality into nothing, but out of fiction into fact. And third, it's going to make you laugh right out loud at how short the trip home was. It wasn't a trip at all. You were already there. Death is absolutely all of the resurrection we can know now. The rest is faith. Go in peace. Amen.